Welcome to our show, the 77% Street Debate. This week, we are in Cotonou on Lenin Square, a place that commemorates the friendship between the Soviet Union and Benin. Today, we are going to discuss a very current topic with young Beninese, Russia's influence in Africa. What do young Africans think about it? And I'll start with a young political activist, Christelle. How do you perceive Russia's influence in Africa?
In terms of influence, we see Russia as a power that comes with its share of hopes and fears. Fears because we know that when Russia arrives in a country, it does not care about the way internal politics are conducted. I mean young Africans who live in countries that aren't democratic, that haven't experienced democracy yet, are nevertheless striving for that experience. And knowing that this is not one of Russia's focal areas is alarming.
Thank you very much for your opinion. I see someone winking in the back over there, Jean Jaurès. You are a linguistics expert. When we talk about Russian influence in Africa today, what does that mean to you?
We are here at the Lenin Square, as you said earlier. And this is a symbol of the fact that relations between Russia and Africa aren't new. They go back to the independence era. So we as Africans open our doors to anyone who comes, and we can prove to ourselves that we actually have the power to negotiate with the partners we choose.
You have lived in Russia, you speak Russian, you are a young African. What do you think of all that has been said about the Russian influence in Africa?
Russia's influence in Africa is indeed very present, and it's rooted in history. During the Cold War, Russia established very strong diplomatic ties with African countries. The first African political cadres were trained in Soviet Union. At least 25,000 African cadres were trained there, and many more were trained directly in Africa. So it's logical that this generation of leaders are ideologically closer to Marxism and Leninism, which had a major influence in Africa at the time.
Thank you very much, Seth. We are now going to hear Josué's opinion. Josué, you are a young political activist. How do you view Russian influence in Africa?
Benin collaborated with Russia for 18 years, but economically, not much has changed in the country in these 18 years of relations with Russia. Today, we see that Russia is repositioning itself. We see what is happening in Ukraine, that Russia is no better than the other countries that we are fighting, like the West. Russia is attacking the country, a young country, because of its own interests. Today, it is the Ukrainian people who are suffering.
Today, we are no longer indifferent to what is happening in Ukraine. Who wants to comment on the origins of this war, on Russia's aggression against Ukraine, an independent and sovereign nation? How do you interpret this war?
In my view, the war between Ukraine and Russia is a confrontation between two ideological blocs. There is the European ideological bloc and the Russian ideological bloc. To be able to comment on this, we need to understand this background first.
Okay, so for you, the war is due to an ideological problem. Seth, I have the impression that you do not agree with this. Where does the war in Ukraine come from?
If we analyze President Putin's stance today, we can see a certain nostalgia for the greatness of the former Soviet Union. Today, we see that Russia is defending its sphere of influence areas that were previously part of the Soviet Union at all costs. Unfortunately, Russia is doing this partly by force to keep these countries under its authority, or at least trying to maintain a neutral status quo.
Mr. Josué, do you have something to say? I have the impression that you do not agree with the opinions we've had so far. Do you have anything to say against what is being said?
We have seen that Russia started attacking Ukraine out of the blues.
D'accord.
All right.
D'accord.
All right.
D'accord.
C'est votre point de vue pour attaquer l'Ukraine.
So they attacked Ukraine. One thing for sure, Ukraine is an independent country amid negotiations. We have observed for some time the rise of pro-Russian presidents at the head of Ukraine. But then President Zelensky came into power. He had an anti-Russia policy and clearly demonstrated that he wanted to move towards Ukraine's total independence from Russia, so that they have the right to choose their international alliances. I think it's the same fight we are fighting in Africa. It's the fight for the African people to choose with whom they want to collaborate.
Anaïs, aujourd'hui,
Anaïs, what is the impact of this crisis, of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, on the lives of young Africans?
Sur la vie des jeunes Africains.
The impact can clearly be felt. Gas is expensive, oil is expensive, many food products are more expensive because these products were exported from these countries, from these two states in particular. Russia produces gas and oil, cereals, especially wheat. Ukraine also produces a lot of cereals. And today this war has had an impact on all of us, and especially on us young people. We really feel it.
D'accord.
All right. So, in your opinion, what steps should African countries take to ensure that future crises do not negatively impact African economies?
L'économie africaine.
Africa today needs to find its own way. A wheat shortage should not be a problem because we have alternatives.
What are alternatives?
Because we can make manioc bread. We have fonio, millet, sorghum and yams.
But how can we ensure an increased availability of manioc, millet or sorghum in our markets? How can we make this work?
I think in this area there is simply lack of political will because the know-how is there.
All right, so a lack of political will. Thank you, sir. Let's listen to Christelle's solutions to conclude. Christelle, what is your solution?
I believe there is no miracle solution. We must work to motivate every Beninese and African citizen to get more productively involved on a daily basis. Because if everyone works on developing their personal skills and gets involved in their community, we would have the hoped for solutions.
A desire for sovereignty. Training Africans on the continent so that they can respond to problems locally. Thank you for watching this episode of the 77%. Don't forget to comment, share and like. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.